for us, it's really important for people just to understand the plight of indigenous peoples in our own country and in our own land, and for people just to become aware of our own history, because for us, it's a part of the healing process to just understand history, good or bad, is important, and especially the bad parts of history, we need to identify it and acknowledge it so we can continue to grow and move forward with it.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hoda Labrada Gore. This is episode 137, and my guest is Sherman. Sean is the Sioux Chef. That's S-I-O-U-X. Sean Oglala Lakota was born in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and he has become renowned nationally and internationally in the culinary movement of indigenous foods. He runs his own business as a caterer and food educator in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And he and his Sioux Chef team have also recently established a nonprofit to make indigenous foods more available to his community. His first book, The Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen, was awarded the James Beard Medal for Best American Cookbook for 2018. Sean is all about lifting up not only local and traditional foods, but traditional cooking methods as well. He and his teams are basically reintroducing Native American cuisine to today's world. And along with the food, they are helping all of us understand better the importance of traditional culture and wisdom. In today's conversation, Sean tells stories of his childhood. He dives into the rich food culture of his people, and he explains why the time has come to encounter and reclaim the lost world of indigenous food wisdom. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to recognize our sponsors. The Wise Traditions Podcast is brought to you in part by Green Pasture. Green Pasture products are inspired by the research of Dr. Weston A. Price. Traditional diets were much more rich in vitamins and nutrients than our diets today. This is why they offer fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Boost your health with wholesome, healthy Green Pasture products today. Go to greenpasture.org. And Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant, the probiotic everyone's talking about. Go to thriveprobiotic.com. And as always, the Weston A. Price Foundation. Make plans to join us at our Wise Traditions Conference in Baltimore this November. It is a nutrient-dense conference like no other. So go to wisetraditions.org and register today. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
I hardly know where to begin because there are so many things we want to talk about with this whole subject of ancestral cooking and especially this indigenous flavor that you bring to the table. But let's take it back to when you were a kid and you were making a choke cherry sauce with your grandmother. Tell us about that moment.
You know, when I was young, at all the gatherings, there was always a lot of cooking going on in the kitchens. And there was a sauce that was traditional still called wojapi, that was traditionally made with choke cherry. And we used to pick the choke cherries, like our properties were lined with them, and we would gather a ton of them in the late summer and then make this wonderful sauce. And for people who haven't had choke cherry, it's a really interesting small berry that's got a giant pit in it, so it doesn't taste like much right off the tree, but when you cook it down, it just gets this really beautiful, deep aroma. And it's just something for me that I get to play with on occasion, and it always kind of whisks me back to being that age of being around the kitchen as a young boy.
And what would you have the sauce on?
Well, we used to use it for whatever. So we had a lot of fry bread back then that it would go on, but we also just kind of put it on everything. And since I started my business with indigenous-only foods and cutting out pieces like fry bread, we've been putting it on meats and making soups with it and sauces with it, and it's just super versatile. So it's just a really beautiful flavor.
Please tell us where you're from, where you were raised. Tell us a little bit about your history.
I was born on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, and I'm enrolled in the Oglala Lakota Sioux tribe, and grew up there until just before high school. And my mom moved us off the reservation and into the Black Hills, where I did high school and college in a small town called Spearfish, South Dakota, in the northern Black Hills. And I just really got to spend a lot of time outdoors in both of those areas. And after college, I moved here to Minneapolis, where I'm based at now, and I've been here since the late 90s.
So, Sean, I've heard that life on the reservation can be difficult. How was it for you?
We were just kids back then. We saw issues because we saw drinking problems, we saw marital issues, drug abuse, and things like that. But as kids, we were just really focused on being kids. So we were kind of running around wild outdoors a lot. We only got, I think, 1.5 channels on TV. So TV just wasn't really a thing. And so spent pretty much all of our time outdoors, running around the plains and the prairies, and moving to the Black Hills, the same thing, just running all over those hills. So Pine Ridge, it does still today have a lot of issues, and that's part of the reason that we're doing the work today through food and trying to bring some health back into some of these hardships that we've seen.
Well, talk to us about that work you're doing. What is this Sioux Chef mission that you've started?
Well, the Sioux Chef is the business that we started a while back. I started it in 2014. I brought on my business partner, Dana Thompson, pretty shortly after it started, and we've really grown it with a few key people over the past few years. And the mission was always to get healthy indigenous foods out there. So we're looking at very regional foods. We're looking at history. We're looking at what people were eating and just an understanding of indigenous food systems. So we were looking at wild foods and the usage of that, harvesting techniques. We were looking at Native American agriculture, looking at seeds that were still out there from the native tribes because agriculture was in such a widespread area. So, it starts in southern Mexico and moves all the way up into parts of Canada and all along the Mississippi and Missouri River valleys. And, aligning myself with groups like I'm on the board with Seed Savers Exchange based out of Decorah, Iowa, which focuses on heirloom seeds, and also a small native-run nonprofit here called Your Wild Health, and just being really close to that. But also looking at cooking technique and just the health aspect and food preservation, and just trying to get people to understand. So we cut out all colonial ingredients of things like dairy, wheat flour, processed cane sugar, beef, pork, and chicken, and started really looking at, what were people eating in these very specific regions. So we've been able to design this business around these wonderful foods, utilizing all this wild food and native agriculture and game and fish, and create these really authentic flavors and, helping to influence and also doing it in other regions around the U.S., whether we're in the Pacific Northwest or Southwest or East Coast. There's all this wonderful diversity in the indigenous food systems that really speak of the regions people are in.
Oh my gosh, my mouth is watering and you haven't even started talking about food, but I'm like, indigenous, regional, wild foods, like all these things really get my juices flowing. But I realized, Sean, I need to back up for 10 seconds because I was like, okay, how do we get from here to there? In other words, you were talking about being in college and then you were talking about starting this group in 2014. What happened in that in-between time that moved you in this direction?
After moving to Minneapolis by 2000, I got my first executive chef position in Minneapolis. I kind of shot my way through the works there pretty quickly. Uh-huh. And then after a few years of being an executive chef in Minneapolis, I had the epiphany of doing the work that I'm doing now because I'd been studying so many other cultures and really digging into it and then realizing like I didn't even know that much about my own Lakota ancestry when it came to foods and really started trying to understand that. It was kind of this epiphany moment where I was able to walk around Minneapolis and find foods from all over the world and nothing that represented the land or the people or the history that was here, even though, the indigenous history here is not that old. This was all indigenous land not that long ago. So it just seemed weird that there was no Native American restaurants or food businesses out there. So I just really wanted to try to understand why and really have a good understanding of my own family and the foods that we were eating before Europeans came through and influenced. And it just kind of shot us on this path of what we're doing today.
That is so cool. And I can't help but think that it's like your ancestors were calling you. You had your hands-on experience in the kitchens, right? And then you had this intellectual curiosity, but there might have been something more at play. What do you think?
Once I found the path, the path just opened up, and looking backwards, I'd already kind of been on it. Like even things like right out of high school, I worked for the Forest Service where I had to learn all the plants in the northern Black Hills. Those lessons came in extremely handy much later when I started really digging into the understanding of wild foods through an indigenous perspective. But it feels like, this is just kind of flowing through, and things like I never knew I was good at being a public speaker, and now that's what I do a lot. But I feel like this vision and this voice just kind of is flowing through me. And, I feel like we have tapped on something, and it is wonderful that people are listening and we're able to get this message out there. and we're able to do it in real time and show the relevancy of it. And, part of it was that we weren't trying to do a complete timepiece and cook like it was 1491, but to really utilize all of this knowledge from the past and apply it to now so we can kind of evolve and grow with it for the first time in a long time, because we've been in this kind of constant state of oppression within indigenous communities all across the U.S. and Canada. And we just see this as an opportunity to do something positive and healthy and really strengthen the culture by bringing the food back into it.
And this is exactly what our Wise Traditions group is all about. We are about reconnecting with the traditions that were so healthy and good for us in the past, but using technology as servant is kind of one of our bylines. So we're all about it having its place in cooking ancestrally. Yeah, so talk to us now. Let's get to the nitty gritty, the stuff that was making my mouth water just a moment ago. Talk to us about the regional foods that are connected with your culture and your people.
For me, like Lakota, they covered quite a bit of ground. And, even before the history began on the plains, a lot of Lakota people were here in the Minnesota woods too. So this was kind of a natural region between Minnesota and the Dakotas and then around the Black Hills. So looking at this diversity and terroir that's around us, so we have these forests and lakes, we have these prairies and plains, we have places like the Badlands, which are right around Pine Ridge Reservation. You have the Black Hills, which have an immense diversity too, because it's just kind of this unusual group of mountains in the middle of the prairie. And then there's just all sorts of plant diversity throughout that. So there's all sorts of amazing tubers like the timsala, which is a prairie turnip, which is a huge staple for a lot of people on the plains. In Minnesota, we have the unique hand-harvested wild rice, like the true wild rice, not the black stuff that you see coming out of California, but, the stuff that's on the lakes and people are harvesting with canoes, and they're in really beautiful, clean, pristine waters. And there's just all sorts of stuff. There's wild gingers and mustards, and there's all sorts of fruits, there's berries, the fish. We use fish directly from Red Lake. So there's walleyes and whitefish and northerns and things like that. And we have Lake Superior, which has an amazing amount of diversity in those waters too. We're just using things like venison and elk and rabbit, even like muskrat and beaver and things like that on occasion too. So there's so much to think about and so much to play with out there. And as a chef, it's exciting just to have all of these flavors that are literally right outside our door that people haven't been utilizing, but we're able to identify and make a part of our cuisine and really make it taste exactly like where we are. So creating dishes that might be something like sunchoke and walleye and blueberry and cedar and all these ingredients that you would see standing on one lakeshore in Minnesota, just looking around you and seeing all the flavor and ingredients right there.
And Sean, you have a whole team that works with you. Do they know how to cook and prepare this food just as you do?
Yeah, because that's what we've done. We have a small catering company here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, where we're kind of a unique caterer since we're serving only indigenous foods. And we had a food truck for a couple of years called Tatanka Truck, which we had originally opened up with the Little Earth community of United Tribes, which is kind of an urban native community. And we did that to kind of try out what an all healthy, all indigenous food business be like. And it was very successful. And right now we're getting ready for a couple of restaurant projects. And we just released a nonprofit with a vision of going national and helping to open up indigenous food businesses all across the nation.
That is so exciting because you weren't sure when you got going with all this, I'm practically positive, that this would be a success. You didn't know how people would receive Native American dishes, right?
We really weren't sure, and there was a lot of skepticism because people just didn't know. They're like, I don't really know what Native American food is beyond fry bread and bison. And we're like, well, we're not doing fry bread. And then they're like, well, I don't know. So there's so much to showcase, but, we've been doing it and we've gotten national attention and, we've been in big publications and winning this James Beard Award with this first cookbook and having this cookbook utilize only indigenous ingredients are amazing steps forward for all of us as indigenous peoples to help showcase this wonderful food system that we have, no matter where you are, because no matter where you are in North America, there's indigenous history, land, culture, and food sitting there.
Well, congratulations on that award. That is just a beautiful affirmation of the work, mission, and the food that you're bringing to the table.
Well, thank you very much.
Coming up, Sean explains how oppression has played a part in the poor health of indigenous people today, and how a return to their traditional and local foods can turn things around for them and for all of us. We pause now to recognize our sponsors, Green Pasture. Green Pasture sells a variety of products to boost your health. Organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee, skincare balms, and more. Their fermented cod liver oil comes from the prolonged soaking of wild cod livers in brine, which allows cod livers to naturally ferment. It's a gentle process compared to that used by most highly industrialized cod liver oil manufacturers. Personally, I take their cod liver oil daily and I rarely get sick. I'm so thankful for Green Pasture's thoughtful traditional practices and products. Go to greenpasture.org and place your orders today. And Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Most probiotic pills just pass through our bodies without achieving the desired effect. Just Thrive is the first 100% spore-forming probiotic that arrives alive in the intestines naturally. It supports optimal gut health, digestive health, immune health, and it delivers antioxidants. It's great for adults, kids, the whole family. The probiotic everyone's talking about. Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Visit their website at thriveprobiotic.com. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. We are committed to helping you and the world eat better. Join us at the Wise Traditions Conference this fall in Baltimore, November 16th to the 18th. We have all of the excellent speakers and the wonderful food that you have come to expect. And there will be all kinds of tracks or talks that can address just about any issue or interest that you have, from cooking to gut health to cancer, even aging gracefully. So register today, or at least by June 15th. When you do register by the 15th, you'll save $75 off of the full conference price. So go to wisetraditions.org for more, and I hope to see you there. It's one thing to find those regional foods. How did you know how they were prepared back in the day?
Part of it was just a lot of research. So it was looking at how indigenous peoples were utilizing cooking techniques, without, say, petroleum. So a lot of live fire cooking and, what were the food preservation methods? So a lot of dehydration. So you see a lot of drying out foods, rehydrating foods. You see simmering and boiling foods. There's earth ovens. There's cooking directly near fire or putting foods directly in the coals. There's all these techniques that were being utilized. So when I started looking at beyond just Lakota and looking at all across North America, I started seeing not only that diversity, but all these commonalities in cooking and health around the foodways. So for us, we were just experimenting. And again, we were using some traditional recipes that we knew about, but most of the recipes were kind of our contemporary take on them by just having a deeper understanding of the pantry and the cooking techniques and trying to mimic those flavors and keeping them as pure as possible as we grow, but also creating a whole bunch more new recipes out of these flavors and foods that we're playing with.
It sounds so good. And one reason I think it's appealing to me, it's local, and it's also opting out of the processed food system. Do you think it's more nutritious and as wonderful as it seems to be?
Yeah, because you see a lot of studies with wild foods, because we really believe in permaculture too, because a lot of indigenous communities were helping the wild foods around them grow by basically maintaining what we would call orchards, basically putting lots of food plants all around and helping them continue to produce foods. And you see a lot of studies with both wild foods and some of the heirloom corns compared to, say, a GMO corn, and you're going to find a lot more nutritious value within those comparisons. So it is an extremely healthy diet, and that's one of the biggest things that we're trying to get out there, because we see with indigenous communities that have been kind of in this oppressionistic state for a long time, and the food access that's very limited to those regions. We see those things like high rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease and all these issues of poor food access, whereas when they were on indigenous-only diets, they didn't have those kinds of health issues. And these foods are extremely healthy and can be something that can help a lot of those issues, because it's basically this really wonderful low glycemic diet with lots of plant diversity, low salts, really good fats, lots of seeds and nuts, lots of really healthy proteins. And it's just like a perfect diet. It's like almost what all of the diet fads are trying to mimic today. And you find it within indigenous communities basically around the world with how they were treating their indigenous diets.
Have you been able to take this food via your Tatanka truck or what have you to your own community?
I go back to the Black Hills a few times a year, and I've been down to Pine Ridge a few times. And we work with a lot of the tribes directly around us here in Minneapolis and Wisconsin, Iowa. We were just down in Iowa. We've been able to travel to tribes all over the U.S., basically, And again, to help influence, even like within our small group of people working at the Sioux Chef, we're from many different nations all around us. So we've got places like Red Cliff and Lower Sioux, Navajo Nation, and Pine Ridge, and we're at Red Lake, and we're just really diverse just within our own small group. And as we're getting ready to grow out this nonprofit, we are hoping to get these businesses opened up in tribal areas all across the nation, and not only in the U.S., but eventually Canada, Alaska, and Mexico also.
Well, let's get specific about one of the dishes that's in your award-winning book. Can you tell me about one of your favorites?
You know, it's a tough one to say because we cook so regionally and we cook so seasonally that there's just so much fun stuff to do. But something simple like duck and wild rice pemmican. So pemmican, we called it wasna basically growing up, which was dried meats, a little bit of fat from the bison, and some, again, dried choke cherry. And it was just like this really powerful kind of energy food that you see. So we did a take of that using duck and duck fat and puffed wild rice and blueberries, which has more of kind of a northern Minnesota feel to it. And that's something that's fun and simple and kind of showcases technique and flavor and region also.
And it's kind of cool that the world is waking up to the importance of some of these foods you're talking about. Pemmican, I know of some like ultra marathon runners who take pemmican with them because it's like this dried fat, like you were saying, that is going to give them a boost of energy, and it's much better than any kind of power gel. So does that give you some kind of secret pleasure? I know it makes me happy.
Yeah, because it was like that too, because people could just put a bunch of it in their pouch and just run around and, you know, just have this powerful food in their pocket when they needed access to energy and health.
I know that part of your mission is about education. So can you speak a little bit to us about the Native American migrational histories? And since we were talking about movement, I'm just curious, what can you tell us about that and how does that inform what you do today?
Yeah, we talk a lot about it because education is a big part of what we're doing, and it's actually one of the main goals of the nonprofit. So the nonprofit's called NATIVS, or North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. They're at natives.org. We're getting ready to kind of become a really big resource for Indigenous education around foodways. And part of that is understanding all of it. And the history is such a big part of it, too, because a lot of people are so unaware of Indigenous history just because of how our own government has basically kind of wiped off the history. So I see high school books out there saying things like, oh, and then, you know, as more immigrants came in, the Native American peoples kept moving westward to make room for them, you know, which we know obviously is not the case. So, you know, we really break it down to an understanding of how colonialism works. So understanding the European colonialism on a wide scale of, you know, affecting South Africa and the Caribbean and eventually North America and India and Australia and New Zealand and Africa, Hawaii. It's kind of like this worldwide scale of this colonial push to like grab resources from all over the world, and it makes Europe extremely rich, these European powers. But then we see the U.S. government shortly after declaring their independence and becoming a new country. In the early 1800s, they start this huge push to kind of take over what is the rest of North America, well, the rest of the United States in that matter. And really, most of it falls between the years of 1840 and 1870. So by 1840, still like 75% of what is the U.S. is still under indigenous control. And then by 1870, it's pretty much wiped out to the point where, you know, you look at the reservation systems today, and it's barely like 1% of the country, which is a huge loss of land. And so we just look at that history of not only a loss of land, but also a loss of culture and a loss of foodways, and especially with the boarding school systems where people should have been learning about their traditional ways, but instead they were being taught to speak English and to do trades like carpentry and house cleaning and stuff like that, when we should have been maintaining a lot of this generational knowledge of like living with nature and utilizing plants and hunting and fishing and food preservation and farming and agriculture. And we lost just a ton of knowledge, which is part of the reason why there aren't Native American restaurants all over the country featuring indigenous-only foods, is because it was kind of like this cultural genocide that was happening during the mid to late 1800s, to the point where the 1900s have still been really rough. Because even growing up on Pine Ridge, as per a lot of reservations, you couldn't even legally vote up until the 1960s.
Wow. A lot of what you're saying is giving me pause, that 1% figure.
Yeah, there's some very powerful videos that will showcase like how fast the U.S. government takes over what is the land in the U.S., and it's still happening today. There's still land grabs happening. Like we were just losing things like bear's ears, which was a huge loss. And it's really hard to even keep up with some of these natural resources. So for us, it's really important for people just to understand, the plight of indigenous peoples in our own country and in our own land, and for people just to become aware of our own history. Because for us, it's a part of the healing process to just understand history, good or bad, is important. And especially the bad parts of history, we need to identify it and acknowledge it so we can continue to grow and move forward with it, and not keep an oppressionistic state in these indigenous communities and reservations. Because if you look at statistics on Pine Ridge, you'll find upwards to over 90% unemployment rates and this horrible health epidemic that's going on because of being set on commodity food programs, which was never a nutritional program, but just a way to get food to people. And it's just been slowly poisoning people, for a few generations now.
Well, I am grateful that your group has a mission to reacquaint us with these Native traditions of food that can help revive our awareness and understanding of Native culture and history.
Yeah, and it's really important because food is something that we all share in common, no matter what our background is. And it's something that's very important. And a lot of people who have a few generations of family living in different parts of the U.S. can appreciate just having a deeper knowledge of how people have lived there for thousands of years before European settlers came through. And the knowledge that sits there is because it's this one commonality you're going to find with indigenous groups all around the world, is that they have this blueprint of how to basically live sustainably in their region, utilizing only plants and animals around them. And it's a wonderful lesson in sustainability that we can all use in all of our different regions, and it really helps identify our regions better too. So we can imagine a world where if you could drive across the U.S. or Canada and stop at indigenous restaurants all along the way and see the immense amount of diversity that we have within our areas and celebrating that diversity, it would just feel so much different. And you would just see so many cool foods and different foods as you travel from any direction you go, east to west or north to south, or even, visiting indigenous groups down in Mexico, where there's a lot of indigenous culture still left alive down there. Because we just look at North America through an indigenous perspective, and it doesn't matter if one side speaks English or one side speaks Spanish, because those are both colonial languages. We're just looking at the people and the history and the culture and the foods that have been there long before any European influence had happened.
What a beautiful vision you have. And you're right, we have these artificial divides of language or borders, right?
Because all these borders have basically crossed us as indigenous peoples, so we know when we're in different people's lands and the differences between, what is, say, Apache food versus Muckleshoot food or wherever we might be. So it's important for people to understand those histories, and it's just going to give everybody a deeper sense.
Well, Sean, this has been super informative. I'm going to put links in the show notes to your missions, both the Natives and the Sioux Chef missions. So we'll get that in there. Is there anything else you want to add to our listeners that's important for us to know as we try to wrap our heads around indigenous food ways?
If people are interested, our book is available out there. You can find it at your local bookstore, at Amazon. And then we feel like it's a great introductory to just talk about indigenous foods, regional foods, and some of the history and philosophy behind it. But feel free to visit our websites and to see the work that we're doing. And hopefully we'll be seeing our restaurants opening up all across North America.
Oh, we certainly hope so. We will put a link to that book and to these other resources as well. And I just want to ask you as we wrap up, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, Sean, what would you recommend that they do?
A part of this diet is the biggest part. So it's eating super hyper local. If you cut out all this dairy and wheat flour and processed sugar, especially for non-European people, it's extremely healthy. And just, supporting some indigenous food vendors if there are any in your area. And just being curious about the plants outside and making the flavors of your region a little bit more a part of your dinner table.
Wonderful. Well, we will do just that. Thank you again for your time, and we hope to talk to you again sometime soon, Sean.
Thank you very much for having me.
My guest today was Sean Sherman, the Sioux Chef. To connect with Sean, go to sioux-chef.com. That's SIOUX-chef.com. For the show notes and highlights from this episode with links to resources we mentioned, just go to our website, westinaprice.org, and look for the show notes for episode 137. Hey, and if you're enjoying this podcast, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a thing. And if you haven't done so yet, please rate and review our show on iTunes. Every review lets folks know that this show is worth listening to. Next week, everybody, we get to hear from Julia Ross. Julia is a world leader in using nutritional therapy for the treatment of mood problems, eating disorders, and addictions. She is the author of The Mood Cure and The Craving Cure, among many other books. We spent a lot of time talking about what makes a person crave certain kinds of foods, and it was so enlightening. Julia is brilliant, and I loved our conversation. I know you will too. She has a strong handle on what makes us crave these certain foods and become a certain kind of craver, and what to do about the cravings. There was so much stuff to unpack in the conversation, it just might be a two-parter. So stay tuned for that. Finally, a big thank you to my friends at Podcast Village, to Charlie Burney, both Robs, Shannon, and even Santos. Thanks to the team of interns who help us pull off the show week after week: Cynthia Castro Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Amy Marvin, Deirdre Beard, Diva Rizvi, Melanie Ahern, Mary Hine, Cheryl Huftelin, and Olga de Villiers. Last but not least, please give me your feedback. Let me know what you thought of this episode, or give me ideas for future shows. I'm on Twitter at Holistic Hilda. I'm also on Instagram at Holistic_Hilda, or visit my website, holistichilda.com. As you know, I am a health coach, fitness professional, and a podcast consultant. So reach out to me, and I would love to connect with you. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon.
Thanks for listening today. Our website, westinaprice.org, offers free resources to address your questions and support your journey to health. You'll find videos, articles, and brochures covering a broad variety of health topics. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.